Throughout history, there have been people who have committed some of the most heinous crimes fathomable. For those crimes, they have been convicted and sentenced to death. Welcome to Death Row Executions, where we take a look into the lives of society's worst offenders. And now, your host, Air.
Hello everyone, this is Air, and welcome to the 58th episode of Death Row Executions. Now, it has been over 100 years since a president has executed a federal death row inmate during a presidential transition. Our current president, Donald Trump, will also be known as the president to see the most federal death row executions during a president's time in office. Today's story is on the 10th federal death row inmate to go this year in 2020, Alfred Bourgeois. Alfred Bourgeois was born in the year 1964 in Louisiana. He had 6 other siblings, and out of all of his siblings, he was the only one who was singled out by their mother and the only one abused by her as well. Alfred's older brother Lloyd was later interviewed and said that their dad was not in the picture, and things got so bad for Alfred that he had to take refuge in a neighbor's house who went by Miss Mary. Miss Mary ultimately raised Alfred while his mother did not care or question anything. She would even deny him coming to visit and entering her home. All of his siblings stayed with his mom, so he was the black sheep of the family. Despite how she was with Alfred, Lloyd claimed that he and his other siblings grew up happy with their mother. Alfred, on the other hand, continued to have a difficult time, and he was held back multiple times in elementary school and had documented low IQ scores. He was said to have had a hard time academically and was unable to follow directions well. Despite this, he was able to engage in normal conversations and was even able to eventually graduate high school. He ended up marrying and having a child, but he and his first wife ended up getting a divorce. Although not involved, he did pay his ex-wife child support every month. After his divorce, he started a new relationship with a woman by the name of Robin, and they had 2 children together. They were living in Louisiana, but Alfred, living his life as a truck driver, spent a lot of time on the road and in different states. Between late 1998 and early 1999, Alfred had an affair on his wife Robin with a woman by the name of Katrina Harrison. By October of 1999, Katrina gave birth to a baby girl by the name of Jakaren. At the time, Katrina lived in Livingston, Texas with her mother and was raising baby Jakaren by herself without the help of Alfred. Years later, Alfred was made aware that he could possibly have a child, so in April of 2002, he went to court in Texas so he could find out if he was indeed Jakaren's biological father. When the paternity test proved Alfred was the father, the following month, he and Katrina returned to court to determine the amount of child support he would be paying her every month. Alfred tried his hardest to get out of paying child support and came up with an elaborate scheme that ultimately failed. He brought one of his nieces to court in an attempt to lie and say that it was his daughter who had kidney problems and would not be able to afford high child support payments. There was a rule that no family members were allowed inside the hearing, so his niece was not allowed inside the courtroom. Before trial concluded, he asked the judge if he could have visitation, and the judge awarded him to have 7 weeks of visitation that would start the same day after court had ended. The judge also awarded Katrina $160 in child support every month. 2-year-old Jakaren left with Alfred and his niece to Louisiana, where his wife and children lived. Katrina and her family said that Jakaren left in perfect health and had no issues. Not too soon after Jakaren's arrival, a family friend came over to visit and noticed that there was blood in Jakaren's diaper. She encouraged Alfred and Robin to go to Child Protective Services because she assumed something had happened while in the care of her biological mother, Katrina. Alfred and Robin agreed to get CPS back in Texas involved. He let Child Protective Services know that Jakaren's mother, Katrina, was living with a convicted sex offender, and that man used his finger to molest Jakaren. A physician examined Jakaren and concluded that the blood was external irritation and there were no signs of vaginal trauma. CPS followed up with the accusations and said the accusations were false and made in bad faith. Alfred got away with lying, and what his wife Robin failed to communicate was that when Jakaren arrived, Alfred did not allow her to sleep in the master bedroom anymore. Instead, he slept in the room with Jakaren and his other daughter with the doors locked. With Alfred's job, he would take long trips driving his truck, an 18-wheel tractor trailer, where his family would accompany him at times. On May 28, 2002, Alfred's kids went on a long trip while Alfred drove. His wife Robin would accompany the family at a later date. Within a month, things started to get worse for little Jakaren. She was constantly abused by Alfred and had no one in her new family to help her. On his truck route, he would randomly tell other truckers that his daughter was being sexually abused at his mother's house, which is why he had her. Jakaren was being potty trained at the time, and because of her frequent accidents, she was required to sit on a potty seat at all times, even when she was asleep. Alfred had a horrible temper, and whenever she had an accident or got him upset, he would punch her in the face, strike her with extension cords, and on one occasion, he whipped her with a belt so hard that his belt broke. He had also given Jakaren black eyes, but he tried to conceal it with makeup. He would also make her wear sunglasses and tell random people that she had been in a car accident. As if that torment was not enough, Alfred even went to extreme measures and would bite Jakaren on different parts of her body, pulled her ears, and would burn her feet with lighters. Alfred would get angry and tell Robin to leave Jakaren alone, and then dig his fingers in her open wounds and force her to deal with it. There were times in which you think Jakaren would get a reprieve from his abuse, like times he would stop to visit beaches or hotel swimming pools, but she was never safe. On one occasion, he attempted to try and teach Jakaren how to swim, despite her fear of water. Instead of being patient with his 2-year-old, he would throw her in the air and let her sink in the water for a few seconds before pulling her out. His so-called lessons would last 30 minutes. He would also force her into the ocean when they would visit beaches. On one visit, he had held her under the waves so much that she consumed a large amount of salt water that in turn gave her a swollen stomach and a difficult time walking. Although the family had been to different states like California to enjoy the beach after a truck delivery, Alfred would get postcards and send letters to Jakaren's mother, Katrina, letting her know that Jakaren was having so much fun with the family. In the letters, he said that they had gone to Disneyland, the Elvis Presley Museum, and more, but everything he said in the letters was not true. In late June, the family had to head back home to Louisiana for a bit. While driving, Alfred told Jakaren and his wife that he couldn't stand Jakaren and wanted to kill her. Not being fazed by that alarming statement, Robin went along with it and asked Alfred what he would do if he actually went through with it. He then came up with an elaborate plan that he would first throw her out of the window and then take the family to a truck stop and make everyone use the restroom while he and Jakaren stayed behind. He said when the family came back, he would let them know Jakaren was kidnapped. Robin would then have to call the police, and when they found Jakaren's body, they would blame the death on the made-up kidnapper. On June 23, 2002, Alfred actually called his sister and gave her a subliminal message by telling her to make sure she had a black dress ready because he was going through a lot and had no idea what he was going to do. The family finally made it home on June 26, 2002, and when Alfred checked his mail, he saw a court order that said he needed to pay his first wife $519 in child support back pay. The family did not intend to stay at the house long because Alfred had another truck delivery and needed to drive from Louisiana to Corpus Christi Naval Air Station. While the family was able to go inside, Jakaren was left alone in the cabin of the truck on a hot summer day. Later on, the family got back in the truck so they would be able to make it to Texas the next day. It was now June 27, 2002, and Alfred made it to Corpus Christi Naval Air Station. He was backing his truck into a loading dock for the delivery, and while doing so, Jakaren, who was tied to her potty, lost balance and tipped the potty over, causing her waste to spill in the truck. Alfred's eldest daughter later testified that Alfred got so angry, he immediately started spanking her, grabbed her shoulders, and then started to bash her head repeatedly on the inside of his truck. She also testified that after the first hit, Jakaren's face turned really sad. Witnesses outside of the truck were even able to notice the truck shaking from just how hard he was hitting Jakaren. As if nothing happened, Alfred then got out of his truck to finish his delivery. Robin claimed that she was asleep, not fully clothed, and woke up to Alfred yelling. By the time she made it to the cab of the truck, she noticed that Jakaren's body was limp and her eyes were closed. She thought Jakaren was dead and tried to give her CPR in an attempt to bring her back to life. She begged Alfred to get her some help, but he calmly replied that he would take her to emergency after he was done with his job. Robin picked up Jakaren's body and gave her to Alfred, who in turn laid her on the ground outside of the truck. At that point, Robin got dressed and came out of the truck herself and tried to give Jakaren CPR once again. She begged witnesses to call for help, and someone finally did. When help arrived, Alfred ran from the back of the truck pretending he did not know what was going on and asked everyone what happened. He then told responding officers that Jakaren had most likely fallen from the truck, but they did not believe his story because blood was coming out of her eyes and ears. Her body was swollen, and they even saw old burn marks on her. Alfred was later arrested, and baby Jakaren passed away the next day, less than a month after meeting her biological father for the first time and him being allowed to take her for 7 weeks. The hospital kept Jakaren on life support to give her mother Katrina enough time to say her final goodbyes, and Jakaren died in her mother's arms. Being that she was injured on a military base, his case was tried in federal court. While being held in prison, Alfred joked with other prisoners about a time that he hit Jakaren in the head with a plastic baseball bat so many times that her head looked like a football. He also laughed and joked with other inmates, telling them that he hit her head so hard that it got as big as a watermelon. Dr. Elizabeth Ruse was in charge of Jakaren's autopsy, and she documented that she noticed scratch marks, bite marks on her back and arm, a bruised shoulder, a circular hole that was 1 inch deep under her foot, and when she was internally examined, she noticed majority of her tissue was bruised. There were approximately 25 whip marks, almost 8 healed scars, up to 100 contusions, 10 abrasions, up to 9 ulcerations that were healing, and 3 lacerations. It was also concluded that Jakaren had semen in her anal cavity, so she had been sexually abused as well. The ultimate cause of death was the blunt force trauma to the head after being bashed in the window and truck dashboard. When Alfred's trial began, the court argued that he intentionally killed Jakaren and that he committed the crimes knowing that she was a vulnerable minor, and the acts of abuse were so heinous and cruel that they would be seeking the death penalty. They also said that he was a danger to society and would be a repeat offender. His trial lasted for 2 weeks. All 12 jurors ultimately found Alfred guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and he was sentenced to death. He did try to appeal his sentence on multiple occasions, but they were denied. He tried to argue that his IQ was too low and that the government failed to charge any aggravating factors in the indictment, and that the aggravating factors were vague and ambiguous. He also tried to argue that them saying Jakaren was vulnerable due to her age and claims that the act was premeditated was vague and unconstitutional. The only thing the court acknowledged they did wrong was allowing the director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons to decide where and how the execution would be carried out. They allowed the executive branch to delegate, so in essence, the Attorney General within the Department of Justice. The Attorney General was given authority to release Alfred in the custody of a U.S. Marshal, and the U.S. Marshal then was able to use state and local officials and choose the facility to carry out the execution. When it was nearing Alfred's execution date, he was able to communicate with fellow death row inmate Brandon Bernard, because at Terre Haute, if inmates have close execution dates, they are moved to the same living area and are able to converse and exchange things. Bernard, who was executed a day before Alfred, received his watch and unfinished food. Alfred's execution date was set for December 11th, 2020, and for his last meal, he was allowed to order food from Red Lobster. He ate seafood stuffed mushrooms, fried shrimp, shrimp Alfredo, cheesecake, and 6 biscuits with butter. Before his lethal injection, he gave his final words despite his own family testifying against him. "I did not commit this crime. I ask God to forgive all of those who plotted and schemed against me and planted false evidence." He also ended with saying he never sexually abused anyone in his whole life. Thank you all for watching another episode of Death Row Executions. This video was very hard to do because there were too many graphic details, but rest in peace to baby Jakaren. She did not deserve any of the treatment handed out to her, and I have a couple of questions for you guys. After not being involved in Jakaren's life for over 2 years, Alfred went to court to find out if she was biologically his. When tests determined he was, the judge ruled that he was able to have 7 weeks of visitation. The visitation started right after court. In my honest opinion, I don't care if it was the mother or father who was not involved, but at that moment of discovery, that new parent is a stranger. So 7 weeks gives no time for the child to warm up to the parent, and I'm sure the mother did not feel comfortable because she barely knew him or how he would be around her daughter. I think that put the child's life in danger, and the courts should have had a more gradual visitation order. She was only 2 years old. My next question is about his appeal on who was able to delegate the terms of his execution. Why does it matter who delegates the terms, and why does it matter the location in which his execution would be carried out? If all locations where they do executions are considered humane, then I don't think that the location should matter. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below.